Good morning. I'm with Brandon Macdonald. I'm actually not sure what his role is with Tinka Resources, but he's management of Tinka Resources, and he's buying stock on the open market. Brandon, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well, thanks. I am executive chair. That's my role.
Oh, okay. So you're the big honcho. Executive chair is as big as it gets.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, right? Ultimately, an executive chair has one vote on the board, right? Just like every other board member. I think as opposed to a regular chair, you're involved day to day, and I think you're a bit more hands-on, obviously, right? Certainly around capital markets and stuff like that. But I'm a firm believer that no company should be a autocracy or anything like that. That there should be consensus. So
It's kind of interesting, the whole chairman role, because there's many juniors that don't have a chairman. They just have a CEO, or they have a president and a CEO. Some juniors, the executive chairman is more like a CEO than a chairman. They're actually the face of the company. It's kind of interesting how various companies use the executive roles in different ways.
yeah, and look, there's no hard and fast, explicit required definition, right? Like you're required to have a CEO, a CFO, and a corporate secretary, at least if you're listed, right? So everything beyond that's kind of optional. I think you're right that in some companies the CEO COO dynamic is kind of the same as the exec chair CEO dynamic in other companies. Sort of big picture, external facing capital markets versus operations, execution, etc. Um, that's pretty similar to the way we are at Tinka, although it's always fluid and it's collaborative. I talk to Graham daily.
Okay, so let's go back in time. I want to talk a lot about Tinka and why you decided to step into the arena again with Tinka. But let's go back in time, and I'm not 100% sure of the exact dates of the last couple of years, but some point in early 2024, I think you left Fireweed. Is that right?
Yeah, it was May.
Okay, May 2024. So I'm kind of interested because that seemed kind of abrupt. I mean, it didn't seem abrupt. It was abrupt. I think it was a surprise to many. And you've been in a pseudo retirement for the last 18 months or so.
Sabbatical, I would call it.
Sabbatical. Okay.
Yeah.
Sabbatical. Yeah. So I'm kind of interested. What can you tell us about how it ended at Fireweed? Was it a surprise to you? And then what have you been doing?
It wasn't a surprise, right? Like I didn't know the exact date that it would happen, but I had a nagging suspicion. There was just a difference of opinion on how things should get done, and it wasn't like a hard feeling sort of thing. I think people who know me know that I also pretty set in my ways, and when you've got a bunch of people who are set in their ways and you can't reach consensus, then something has to change. So that change came, and I think it was a good thing for me. I've been able to set some things in motion, which I'm pretty happy about. Take some much needed time off. I'm very happy the company has had the success it's had, and that's certainly helped my pocketbook quite a bit. Um, but, right out of the gate, I started looking at stuff right away. And I told people that, like, no exaggeration, like this is literally not an exaggeration. I had 12 kind of soft job offers, like, inbounds, like, do you want to take this on or take this over by noon on the day my departure from Fireweed was announced. To which I flattered, but said no to all of them. Right. I think it was a lot of companies that had challenges, and were hoping I could fix them. And, which is good, that they would want to put that faith in me. but jumping right back into a company that, I didn't own anything of, etc., was, not high on the agenda. I think I really wanted to take a step back and figure out, what do I want to do next, and that's been a soul searching exercise over the last year of, what part of the life cycle do I want to be in? Do I want to do something bigger? Do I want to stay exploration focused? Fireweed was transitioning to development. Is that, the area I'm excited about? Do I want to try my hand at production? So there was a lot of, sort of thinking about that. And then honestly, a lot of, as that, analysis paralysis, right? Where there was so many options available to me that I just couldn't make up my mind. And it was actually probably started with Roundup this year, so January. I really started to feel like, okay, maybe it's time. And then by PDAC, I went to both conferences, and you're surrounded by your peers, etc., that are busy on things, they're excited about what they're working on, they're passionate about these projects. And I was kind of like, man, I want that again, right? Because I really was super passionate about the success of Fireweed. I'm really glad that, we loaded it up full of people that felt that, passion as well. And they've taken it to new heights. So I wanted to be back in the game. Right. And then when you start thinking that, it's like, okay, well, how long is this going to take? It's interesting. You go way, way, way back, to the very first, concept of Fireweed was before me, was one guy, one of our founders, Richard Heidekevich, who I think 2015 maybe, or 2015, maybe in late 2014, was talking to Hudbay about the Tom and Jason deposits. And there was a site visit in 2015. They approached me in 2016, and we finally got public in mid 2017, right? So you really want to build a company from the ground up. It can take a while, right? So I've got some things going on in the background. One thing has been going for just over a year now, right? And it's been a slog. That's not my counterparty or me. It's just the nature of the beast, right? So yeah, no, I'm definitely trying to get back at it, and Tinka represents part of that.
So going back to Fireweed, it's really interesting because I followed you from the inception of Fireweed, basically. And I mean, for me, it was 2018. I'm sure for you it was earlier. 2018 all the way till May 2024, so that was 6 years. And I watched the evolution of the company. I watched your evolution as a CEO, and I watched you navigate some really challenging market environments. I mean, 2018 to 2024 was a roller coaster for a zinc junior.
Yeah, well, mostly downhill, right?
Yeah, mostly downhill. Well, yeah, you had a little bit of good times at the start, maybe a little bit of a reprieve later in 2019, but then 2020 was a disaster. Yeah, so but you set, during those 6-7 years, you set the foundation for what Fireweed is growing into today. And honestly, watching Fireweed the last year has been a little bit of a head scratcher because the stock has traded so well. And what I attribute that to is the, Lundin stamp is obviously a huge validation, and their network is extremely powerful in terms of attracting capital. But also, you brought in the Mactung project, and there was a bit of foresight there because tungsten is the hottest metal in 2025.
Yeah, well, and I don't know how much foresight there was, right? And I'm, I think that the two things that I did as CEO of Fireweed, and this is going to sound like I'm downplaying how smart I am. Maybe I am, right? I think perhaps the lesson is you got to take shots because sometimes you don't know what you're going to hit. The acquisition of the NID claims off Tech, where we discovered, I mean, the boundary zone was known, but we found, the massive sulfide part of boundary zone, where we were hitting the best ever zinc intersections in the last 20 years sort of thing. We didn't really have a concept that was there, right? That was a very much after the fact thing. You look at what we paid. I think if Tech and us had a suspicion that was there, it would have been a different price, right? That it just shows that you have to take some chances. And then Mactung was interesting because that had started, and I want to say late 2018 in China. I ran into a representative of this is in Beijing. I ran into a representative of the government of Northwest Territories at a kind of Canadian government event where they were, having these mining companies pitch to Chinese mining companies, which right away you can tell it's a different era, effectively, right? Like you would never do that now, right? Can you imagine a bunch of critical minerals companies from Canada going over to China to pitch? No. You wouldn't have it happen, right? So what was interesting was that the NWT government was kind of pitching Mactung to these Chinese entities. And I told the representative, I said, look, I'm there. I've got a good good reputation and relationship with the First Nations. Sell this to me and let me decide whether it belongs in China or should be built by Canadian companies or something like that, right? And they were, oh, okay, kind of interested. And there was a lot of back and forth. And then the Canadian government insisted on selling Mactung with Cantung. So there was a process on that, which didn't succeed. Fireweed put in a joint bid where we tried to take Mactung only, and our engineering partners were going to take on Cantung to remediate it. That was deemed non-responsive, so there was no responsive bids. But finally, the government of NWT came to us and said, "Look, fine. If you'll pay that for Mactung alone, we'll sell it to you." So we did that, and a lot of my thinking at the time was, "Yeah, look, this is a bona fide deposit. This is very clearly a standout in the tungsten space. But if someone else owns this, it could really be a problem for us because they could be terrible partners to the First Nations and sour, them on any mining up that road, right? Or they could get ahead of us, get built, and the First Nations, as you see in some other ones, could be like, oh, one mine a generation. Like, sorry, Fireweed, we got Mactung. You can be built in 20 years. So that was a existential for Fireweed, right? So a lot of the reasons we pushed for it was defensive, and you can see that in the contract because you can see there's a balloon payment on construction of either MacPass or Mactung, because that was basically the NWT government wanting something out of us if we shelved Mactung deliberately, right? Just purely defensive standpoint. So it's interesting, here we are just over 3 years later since the purchase of that. Tungsten price is well over double, right? And suddenly you've got a remote and challenged project, but intriguing to what I would assume would be an absolute barn burner at these prices, right? And it's funny. I don't like optionality plays. I just, I'm very cynical about them. I think having optionality as a part of your play, right? I think is that's great, right? Like, why wouldn't you? That's bonus upside. But a whole play built on optionality, I'm very cynical about. But the value of Mactung emerged from almost nothing. And it was optionality, right? Like optionality on the tungsten price and China US, or China West tensions, which have manifested far more than we could have predicted. And here we are, right? So, it goes to show you that and I think some analysts have that at more than half of the value of Fireweed, right? So it goes to show you that sometimes these secondary plans can very quickly be primary, right? And I think you've seen that over and over again in the junior mining space, where they have their first asset, but it's a secondary asset that actually steals the show.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, because looking at how Fireweed has traded in the last year or so, I mean, we went from $1.10 or $1.20 to a recent high of 3.55 a share, currently trading 3.10. I mean, look, the company has made progress over the last 18 months, but there's nothing groundbreaking that has occurred. And no, I mean, the drill results are just kind of more of the same. You know, it's not bad, but it's not great. You know, it's not the kind of news flow that, you know, I would assume that would trigger a 3x in a pretty large market cap junior. So there has to be a lot of value being ascribed to Mactung here. I think that's got to be a substantial portion of the valuation right now. So yeah, and look, the Yukon has had a really good 2025. All
Yeah,
the Yukon
that's
juniors are doing fantastic.
our once a decade, you know, exploration mania in Yukon. Last time was, ended in kind of 2011, 2012, with the purchase of Kaminak. And well, Kaminak was bought after that, but, the real mania was 2010, 2011 with Kaminak, ATAC, White Gold, and stuff like that, right? There was just a lot going on. It was an exciting time to be in Yukon.
Yeah, that was when ATAC had $1 billion market cap in 2010, 2011. That was pretty incredible. Okay, so Tinka. So fast forward to this month. News release comes out October 6th. You're appointed as executive chairman of Tinka Resources, and your CEO or your chairman quote basically says a new chapter has begun for a reinvigorated Tinka. So tell us about that. Why is Tinka reinvigorated, and what really attracted you to it?
When we launched Fireweed, we had a bunch of, close-ish peers, right? Tinka. I mean, it's called Zinc X now. There was it was Canada Zinc and Canadian Zinc. Canada Zinc became Zinc X, I think, and Canadian Zinc got taken private by RCF and was like Norzinc or something, was it, right? And then there was Solitario and Tinka, right? And I think amongst those, Tinka had the best asset, and certainly 2017, 18, was flying high, right? Like you can remember just everyone talking about Tinka, a lot of the sort of influential min Twitters, super bullish on Tinka. They got their legs kicked out from under them in 2018, just like Fireweed did, just like everyone did, right? And the fact of the matter is that amongst that sort of peer group, most didn't really normalize at all, right? Or, and that Fireweed kind of by hook or by crook survived, I think was a testament to the dedication of the team. The whole time I was watching the success at Tinka, and you see, Nexa Resources coming in, and Buenaventura, and you see there's this, real strategic interest in this, great asset. And as their valuation kept going down and our valuation kept going up, despite their successes, I started to wonder as like, Fireweed CEO, it's like, geez, should we be buying Tinka? Right? Like, is this like a, easy tuck-in? Didn't happen. But, so when I left, I was talking to Graham quite a bit. We had formed a relationship over the years, kind of commiserating as CEOs of zinc companies. And then Michael Horner, who's a good friend of mine, who was CFO of Adriatic, living over in London, when the Dundee Precious bid came in, he reached out to me. I mean, we're chatting all the time, but, he kind of said like, hey, why don't we get involved with Tinka? So it was actually very interesting the way it came together, because it was a bit activist. If you would dig through Tinka's, recent news release history, you'd see they were kind of doing a bit of a strategic review. There was a few options on the table, and then very much the 11th hour, Michael and I came in with some backing. We had some funds willing to back us, and we wrote a letter to the board and said, like, look, if you want us involved, we can bring at least 10 million bucks in. These are the changes we want to see, and we'd happy to help out. So they teamed up with us, so that was great. It's a very interesting approach for me. So I'm very excited about the asset. I think it's I've had a great chance to tour it. It seems like it has everything in place it needs to succeed. They just need to kind of rethink their approach.
Okay, so rethink the approach. When you look at the value of the assets, what do you see? I mean, currently Tinka, after this little re-rating based upon the recapitalization and you guys coming in, some fresh blood into the management team, you're at 62 million market cap in Canada. Is this the sort of asset that could eventually gain a Fireweed type of market cap?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And I think that, they had published their third PEA, and, which is kind of treading water. And I understand, it's really an exploration company. And I think an expectation that they were going to get bought out, and they were close. Right. And it just didn't happen. And, this is, why I think all junior mining companies with legit assets have to realize that the only real alternative to being bought out is building it, right? Just waiting is not a great alternative, and picking away at exploration. So, what Michael and I saw was that, their recent study was kind of I want to say NPV maximalist approach, right? Which on the face of it, you think, well, yeah, of course you want to do a study that maximizes NPV. But, within that PEA, a lot of inferred resource, a lot of lower grade resource, bigger permitting challenge because of the size, etc. And if you think about, well, what do I really want to maximize is my share price, right? That's what I'm trying to do. If we want to maximize the share price, that's fundamentally built on NAV per share. And to maximize my NAV per share, I have to not just get that NPV as high as possible. You got to think about the numerator and the denominator, right? And so how many shares am I issuing to get to, feasibility and construction decision? How long is it going to take me to get there? And the bigger your design, the bigger the scope of your project, the more drilling you have to do, the more engineering you have to do, and the longer it takes, right? So this is lowering your NAV because of time value of money. This is lowering your NAV per share because you're having to issue extra shares to get there. So we really looked at it and said, like, look, there's two high-grade cores at the west and south zones at Ayawilca. They are cohesive enough that they could represent a mine plan independent of the lower grade bits. Why don't we focus on that? And I think, we've got full buy-in from the board now of maybe that's the right way to go. And I say maybe because, we've got a lot of work to do to validate that. Our back of the envelope says that, that's pretty good, but back of the envelope is very different than a rigorous engineering study. So we want to really tuck into it, do some work before we start drilling there mid next year, understand what we're trying to accomplish with our drilling, rather than just a vague bigger, right? Like we want specific kind of bigger. So that's really the change of thinking here.
Okay, so for people who don't know, the Ayawilca resource is pretty damn impressive. I mean, these are eye-watering zinc grades here. I've never seen zinc grades like this. You're talking about like 5% plus zinc in an indicated resource with 16 grams silver, 0.2% lead. You have a bit of indium, and you have there's a tin zone. So this is a very interesting project because obviously, look, zinc is the driver here. It's the main metal in the deposit. it's overwhelming, a zinc project. But you have, as you said, you have some embedded optionality here with silver and tin kickers. Tell us about, just tell us about the project, Brandon. Like the tin zone is very interesting to me.
Yeah, and I think the tin zone needs more work to understand, first off, the geology of it, and how do we, rather than just exploring by drill hole, let's have a conceptual model that we, test and follow, etc., to do more rigorous exploration on that tin zone. As it stands, I think the economics really are on zinc, right? So polymetallic, often can be nice because it lowers your risk a bit, right? But I mean, I'd rather not have 30% of my revenue be like lead. I don't know how much of a future. It's not a super hot metal, right? Obviously silver, great run on silver. That's going to make a big difference, even as small as it is compared to the zinc. And I am still bullish on zinc, right? I made a lot of jokes about not wanting to get involved in another zinc project, but also you kind of think, well, do what you know, right? I mean, and I knew I had looked at all our peers globally, and I knew this was a quality asset, right? So I think that tin zone, can be thought about a lot, even though it's a zone within the same mine, whereas, Mactung is different than Mac Pass, but it's kind of like that. It's a bit of optionality. It's definitely economic now, right? But if tin really goes on a tear, and I think you get the tin barons out there telling you that's absolutely possible, that goes from sort of like a little NPV boost to like a massive game changer, right? So it's nice to have that kind of ace in the hole that you have a secondary metal where, it could be really material with the right macro conditions.
And there's more exploration upside here. Like the last news release is about commencement of a drill program at the Silvia gold copper project, and I see there's some untested porphyry and CRD targets across the project.
Yeah, so Silvia is interesting. It's about 35, 40 kilometers away from Ayawilca. A project that Tinka picked up off BHP about 4 years ago. They had never drilled it. And very interesting Skarn outcroppings there, indications of porphyry mineralization. So we're drill testing the Skarn, where there were some pretty great trench results there. So it's that the best trench result there was 46 meters continuous of 0.8% copper and 1.9 grams gold. Now surface sampling is not drilling, right? So you have to kind of test that, but there's clearly a productive system here. The limestones here are the same limestones that host all sorts of deposits up this belt, including antimina, etc. There's a real possibility there's something pretty special here. This is a inaugural drill program. I think seasoned investors understand that while it's fantastic if you hit on your first drill hole, the guts of the system, it usually takes a bit more than that, right? So I have high hopes for this. I would love to duplicate that trench in drilling. But really what we're trying to get an understanding of is, okay, what does this actually look like? Like, let's remove the bias of surface sampling and take a look at what we got at. Let's start building an underground model. We'll certainly come back next year and do some more geophysics and start to, particularly IP, try to get a sense of where this porphyry is and where there's sulfide mineralization.
Okay.
But it's another one that's, if Silvia is a zero, who cares? I mean, I don't want it to be a zero, but it's not like there really shouldn't be much of Tinka's value hinging on Silvia. Ayawilca carries a value, or carries a fundamental value well beyond what we're trading at, right? So Silvia is purely a bonus.
So Silvia is the embedded optionality that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, if there's a real success there, we could look at like a spin out or something, right? So there's a variety of ways to capitalize on success there, should we be so fortunate.
So this program at Silvia is like a small phase 1 first pass program. It's like 2 or 3 holes.
Yeah. And, I think there is good data there. There needs to be more, like I said. I think if not for the fact that there was this outcrop where we got that trench, you would not drill yet at Silvia.
Okay.
We're not drilling blind, but we don't have a huge sense of subsurface structure. We're not drilling a subsurface target. What we're drilling is we're stepping back from this outcrop and trying to drill below it and see if it's what we see at surface is representative of what's below. If you didn't have that outcrop there, you wouldn't drill yet. And I think that, but you've got that outcrop, and it seems kind of crazy to not just test it, right? See, and that allows, those first drill holes also allows you some ground truth into geophysics you follow up with as well. Yeah. Which is going to help a lot for those geophysics.
Yeah, that's exciting. Wow. I'm glad I took a closer look at this. So Silvia, the drilling is underway there, and that's like sort of a side project. So going back to the main project in this huge zinc resource, what was the real stumbling block for the predecessor management team? Was it just that zinc is a very tricky metal, it's often out of favor, or was there something else going on that impeded the progress of the company, and what are you doing to change that?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of things done right. The exploration was done very well, which is why Graham is still CEO. He's a bona fide explorationist, a PhD geologist who has a tremendous amount of work in Peru, experience there, and the proof is in what they found. But I think there was maybe not a developer's mindset there, right? And Michael having gone through a mine build recently, and me having shepherded that transition of Fireweed from explorer to developer, I think there kind of needed to be that thought process there. I think it was unfortunate that the first strategic investment was from Buenaventura, and then Buenaventura kind of explicitly has been very open about the fact that they're now copper only, right? So I think everyone got excited, like, oh, this is like the first step to a takeout by Buenaventura, and I think people understand now that Buenaventura is unlikely to be the one that takes us on. Maybe they changed, right? Nexa came in. I think Nexa mine build going on in Brazil and stuff like that, and probably not the right time for them, right? So people see like, oh, you've got two big strategics and yet there's no buyout, right? So I think it's kind of like everyone gets excited and then nothing happens. and it's just taking longer than I think people thought, and I think that's given people the impression there's something wrong with the project when that's absolutely not the case. There's still a tremendous amount of interest in the project, and we just have to convince the market again that this is for real.
Yeah, I mean that definitely is very true in junior mining. Very often CEOs, company names, even projects have an expiration date, and when progress is stagnant, when there's stagnation for an extended period of time, eventually the market just gives up on it, and so you very often junior companies have to constantly reinvent themselves. I mean, is there any thought to change the company name at Tinka, to do a rebrand, or do you think that's unnecessary?
I think there's all sorts of things on the table here. I think, and I do think, to go back to what you were saying, I think you got to be dynamic as a junior. I think you got to be doing things. The juniors that are like, well, we don't need to do anything, because we got a great asset. We're just going to sit here. And it's like, well, your strategic counterparties can also wait. Right. And also retail is not generally interested in companies with no news flow. You know,
No.
unless they think there's some sort of catalyst that will self-manifest without work, right? And I don't know if that's often the case, right? So, you know, and this is a big belief, you know, that Michael's brought in as well. That you know, you gotta be doing things. Don't you know? We all heard the expression that the hardest thing to do is nothing. Yeah, fine. Look, sometimes nothing is the right move. You don't want to. You know, you're a trader, right? People who feel compelled to trade daily can trade their portfolio into the
Yep,
dirt,
for sure.
right? But at the same time, you can't be afraid of trading, right? You know, I think you look at, you know, Fireweed tucking in, Mactung. I mean, we looked at a lot of stuff, a lot of stuff as Fireweed, right? And I think that's something that Tinka needs to do now too, right? Is like maybe the right move is nothing, but we want to really take all the other moves and investigate them thoroughly. Like measure twice, cut once, but get out there and measure, right? Like get out there and do things because you don't know.
And then talking about the stock trading, you know, it's interesting. It stands out to me how thin of a volume trader Tinka is, given its market cap. Normally, you know, we'd have 3, 4, 500,000 shares a day on a 60, 70 million market cap, but this one is pretty tight. Is that just because nobody's selling any shares? All the shareholders are just holding tight because they think it's worth so much more?
Yeah. So you know what you think you look at, you know, Buenaventura and Nexa between them have about 30% of the company, about 40% of the company was brought in the recent financing. They're locked up, and even if they weren't locked up, you know, we cherry picked these investors, right? Undoubtedly, there'll be some selling when the 4-month hold comes up, but I think it's going to be much less than normal. And you know, it's over 10% of the stocks turned over, right? So since we announced, so there's not a lot of float. You know, that can create, you know, this is part of the reason we brought in a market maker to help out with this. But you know, that can create these big bid ask spreads and you know, the challenge in price discovery. But I think that the market will wake up to this and we'll start trading healthy eventually, right? It's going to get there.
Okay, very good. Brandon, thank you for the introduction to Tinka, and it's
Yep.
good to speak again after a couple of years of. I think we actually did an interview probably March 2024, if I recall correctly, and
Yep.
then I haven't really spoken much to you since. So it's good to get back at it, and I look forward to more.
Thanks, man. We'll catch up with you soon.
Cheers.